I can't tell you how many books I have sold. I'm not counting because for me, when I recognized by the first book that this is not going to make me into a billionaire, I decided I wasn't going to let that be the objective to make money from the actual book sales. It is what I use the books to do and how the books help me to position myself in a certain light. And that is where the value is, not necessarily because unless you have sometimes you're picked up by these traditional publishers and you get your work out there, you're not going to become wealthy from just the sale of books. So do not let that dissuade you, and do not go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to make billions. It's not going to happen. Let me just burst your bubble. It's not going to happen. Yes, you will sell a few books, but the important thing is how do you leverage the books for other things to elevate your profile, seen as an expert, do workshops, do speaking events, etc., etc.
Thank you so much, Heneka. You've said it all. And
What if writing a book is not just a way to transform the lives of many people, but also a way to create financial freedom and leave a legacy? Wouldn't you want to find out just how to do that? Well, that's what this show is all about.
Hi, I'm Heneka Watkis-Porter, speaker, coach, author of Podcast Power, and the host of the Entrepreneurial You Podcast, inviting you to listen to the Entrepreneur Secrets Podcast, brought to you by C. Ruth Taylor, best-selling indie author and the Caribbean's most trusted voice on entrepreneurship. Tune in for inspiration, information, and innovation to write and win with books. Get ready to dominate entrepreneurship.
Greetings, entrepreneurs, and welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneur Secrets Podcast. It's episode 7. My name is C. Ruth Taylor, and today we're going to be talking about podcasting and how to launch and level up your brand with a podcast. We'll be listening to an interview with Heneka Watkis-Porter, the author of the book Podcast Power, the quick start guide to launching and leveling up your brand. She is an award-winning entrepreneur, and I can't wait to hear what she has to say. Now, before we get into that interview, let's have a word from our sponsor, Frame Art Jamaica.
Come to Frame Art Jamaica Limited for your one-stop framing, graphic design, and printing needs. We frame photos, certificates, paintings, t-shirts, and so much more. You can also get high-quality prints and framing done in a quick turnaround time to fit your budget. Visit Frame Art Jamaica at 22C Old Hope Road, Kingston 5. Weekdays 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Call us at 876-929-3058 or visit us at info@frameartjamaica.com. Serving you for over 30 years.
for too long, the primary way of winning with books has been measured by the number of books that you sold. And as Caribbean authors, most of the times, we don't have the backing of a traditional publishing house and a big budget to print our books and put them in many stores, and we don't have the network. And so after we've sold the first 200 copies of our books, we are pulling our hair out how to do that. Or after the first year or the launch has passed, we don't know what to do and we don't know how to market our books. So when we teach you these strategies to win beyond book sales, shifting your focus, you'll be able to create sustainable ways, products, services, and programs that will cause your books to sell long term, and that even if you don't sell books, you will still win in a big way and create greater impact and income. Seller, make $1 million without selling 1 million books. Impact 1 million without even selling 10,000 books. We trust that you will catch a vision and come on the entrepreneur bandwagon. All right. So our featured guest today is the one and only Heneka Watkis-Porter, my coach. God has used her and caused me to be a firm believer in coaching. It gets you further faster. And she's a leading entrepreneur, award-winning entrepreneur, a coach, 5 times author. So she's the author of 5 books, international speaker. She's the host of one of the leading podcasts in the world, the Entrepreneurial You Podcast, where she helps peak performers to level up their business. And she has interviewed persons like Richard Branson. Yes, that man that has so many businesses. John Lee Dumas, Paul Garrick, Branson, Seth Godin, and she just completed her 200th podcast, her 201 this week. And she's the founder and CEO of Patwa Apparel. She's the creator of the Caribbean's first virtual conference and expo, the Entrepreneurial You virtual SME conference and expo. And recently this year, coming out of an ordeal in 2020, she created an online summit called Slow Down and Live. Health is wealth. We want you to put up some emoticons, some claps, some hearts, and make welcome Heneka Watkis-Porter, the author of this book, Podcast Power, the quick start guide to launching and leveling up your brand. So make her feel welcome, future entrepreneurs. Welcome to the summit, Heneka.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was nice to hear. And when I listened to the introduction that you had, that video there, that introductory video, I felt like I was in an event in the US or some European country or something. It was really, really well done. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
And all the best, as you continue onwards.
All right. Thank you so much. And you loving the video. Just going to put a shameless plug here. Donna Remayton is the editor of the video. And so contact her. So Heneka, you are in the other seat this time. Normally you are interviewing persons, but now the tables have been turned. You're in the hot seat, which you're not new to. So tell us a little bit about your author journey. Before we get into podcast power, the very first book that you wrote, because I read another book from you. I think it was a 30-day devotional for entrepreneurs, and it opened my eyes so much. So tell us about your author journey. What happened? Why did you write the first book? What was the muse behind that? And what was that entire process like?
All right. Okay. So thank you for that. No, I started entrepreneurship in 2007, Ruth. And once I did that, that opened doors for me. You talked about Paso Apparel. That began to open doors for me to speak and to, speak to women and children and, young people and just about everybody about my journey on where entrepreneurship is concerned. And I guess it was a interesting journey because, when you come from situations that I come from, right, you didn't, as we say in Jamaica, boarded gold spoon in their mouth. So first of all, good morning to everybody who is watching forget my manners. Good morning to those on Zoom and in Facebook. So back to the question, right? So once I recognized that this, opportunities is presenting itself, I decided, you know what, it's time for me to leverage it and multiply the impact, because I can speak to, in terms of in person, so many people I know more. But with a book, I can reach far more people than I could ever do just on my own. So I recall just thinking about it. And one day when I had a store at Devon House in Kingston, a friend of mine came into the store, and I know she's big into writing. And I said to her, I've always wanted to write a book. And this was in 2013. But I said to her, I just don't know what to write about. I don't know where to start. I just don't know what to do. And all she said to me was, just start. And that sounds very simple. But in that season, in that period, it was the most profound thing that she could have ever said. Just start. I literally went home that evening and did just that, just start. And that was, I think, in November, December of 2013. And by January 2014, the book was published and we had a launch, and it was, and I think, or was it published in January? No, not in January. It was in June, rather. It was finished, published, launched, everything.
So what was the route? how did you write? Because there are persons who want to understand the technicalities. Uh, you were encouraged again to write, and you followed up on that. And then you said it was launched by June. So take us through that process. So how did you get words to paper? And what was the path to publishing? Did you self-publish? Did you get a traditional deal? Just take us through that whole process so that aspiring authors now can understand, or at least see an option and a way to get their books done.
So for me, it was a very confusing process, to be honest with you, because I really didn't know where to start. I mean, I just started writing, and when I spoke to my friend and asked her, so what you think is hot right now to write about? And we talked about what I'm passionate about and what's really hot. So that merger of the two, and it's really entrepreneurship. And I decided I'm going to go that route, but it was confusing because I also want to tell my personal story. That of I believe struggle and triumph. And I wanted to share that. I wanted to put a picture or paint a picture of who I am and present that to say, it doesn't matter where you're from, whether or not you have the color of connection or you have a surname that is associated with certain doors opening or whatever, you can overcome certain boundaries and barriers. So I wanted to kind of write like an autobiography of sorts. And so the confusion came there, but then I really began to narrow it down. When I was researching, I remember in 2013 as well. I also, was it 2013? I don't remember when it was, but I also did a surgery. And it was in that time too that I was actually researching how to go about it. Yes, it was in 2013 that I had the surgery. And I was researching, how do I go about this thing? And so eventually I decided I'm going to go with I found a publisher of sorts. It's still independent publishing, but it's like the hybrid of, you're not going directly on Amazon. It was like 3 books in. The second or third book, I recognized, hey, I could use, at the time it was Create Space. And I think too, it's one of our speakers on this, one of your speakers on the platform, Heneka Godin, who I know by the time she was actually using Create Space. And she mentioned that, and I came back, when we met at some event, and I came back home in Jamaica, and I started to research Create Space, and I began to do my second and third book. But back to the first book. So when I did that, I recognize that, I'm going to have somebody handle the marketing aspects, the taking care of the ISBN and all these things, because I didn't know where to start. And so I went with a company. But after that, I was able to now go on my own once I found out, you look back, like Dr. Dunbar spoke yesterday that, she spent so much money on her first book, and then she learned, after, where she could have saved a lot of money.
All right. So that seems to be the common thread. Most of us, we have not a clue. And some of us don't have, like what Didan did. Because if you just listen to Didan's presentation, you would think that once I do all the research, I can do it all by myself. And she made the important note that it depends on your prerequisite skills. Because Paul last night said that he tried to do it on his own as well. The first time, it was a disaster. And in order to make that first book right, RIGHT, it took him 1 whole year to do that. So what we're saying in this summit is that we want you to get guidance the first time around so that it can be done well. And then after that, now you learn the process and build your own team. This is not about DIY. We don't encourage newbies to DIY. You need guidance, and that's what this summit is about, to encourage you. And that's why we have the academy as well, where I can provide you guidance, and then after that you take charge of the process. So thank you for sharing that. What was, when you did that book and had the book in your hand, what was the feel? What happened after that?
Wow. So launching the book was one of my greatest memories and accomplishments. And I remember I went through one of our bookstores here. They have a chain of bookstores, I think, but a chain of bookstores. And I was able to get in there, and I had some local celebs here doing readings and just sharing their excitement about the book. I had this event, this physical launch event. And I remember somebody commenting that they felt in the room as though it was, when you go to those John Maxwell events and stuff, that's how she actually felt. And I could feel that energy too being exuded from, just my presentation. And the funny thing is, on that particular launch day, I was going through one of the most challenging times of my life, but nobody knew because I committed to doing this launch and I was going to do it. I was going to do what I was committed to. I can deal with whatever I'm going through after, but I'm going to make the event a wow. And it was a wow. We had people there. It was just a nice little event, coaches that I've worked with as well, and persons that I've always celebrated, my accomplishments were there. And it was a great evening. And so for me, that goes down. And I've had like several high points in my life, but that just feeling of, hey, I'm an author, it just feels different. Like I've arrived.
Wow, wow. And I want to ask that. Maybe you can demystify it for me. What is it about being an author that creates that kind of wow and that excitement? Reverend Chisholm said yesterday, it was like heaven came down full of glory. And Seth Godin was launching his 21st book or 20th book, and yet you still felt that sense of excitement. What is it about authorship? Break it down for me. Maybe you have the answer that creates this excitement that, when you have a first baby, everybody throws a shower. But if you go on to have 12 children, nobody gets excited. But in the book world, even the 12th book, people are still excited and sometimes even more excited than the first. Break that down for me. Demystify it for me.
And you're right, because by the time I get to the fifth, I'm even more excited than the first, but I'll go back to that. So I think one of the reasons, many of us go through life with goals and dreams and stuff. We put things down that we think will be nice to have, nice to do, and want to do, and really, really want to do. And I think for me, for a very long time, writing a book was one of them. And so it's almost like you get this adrenaline rush when you are able, similar to when you have a to-do list, for example. And that's why it's so good to have a to-do list. When you strike things off, it like, wow, you feel great, I've accomplished this, and you move on to the next thing. So too it is for writing a book. You feel like, I've always wanted to do this. Yay, I've actually done this. So now it's time to celebrate, and you feel good about it. And the idea is that each time you do one, you should be getting better. And by the time for me, I reach 5, you're kind of more focused. I mean, the others are experiments. Similarly, when I just started business, everything, like they're almost like experiment. But by the time you get into a certain number or, a certain amount of projects, whatever it is that you're doing, you find yourself like working to be improved, and you're feeling better with each time. So it's like there's no law of diminishing marginal return setting in right here.
There's just something magical about being an author, and it never wears off. And we hope that you will catch that inspiration from us.
And in addition to the feeling that you get and the whatever chemicals that go off in your brain when this happens, you also you alluded to it earlier, the authority, because you become or seen as an expert in something, right? So my first book was 15 Hints to Entrepreneurial Success, Lessons from a Caribbean Businesswoman. So having done business from 2007 when I started Pato Apparel, I now had a few lessons I could share. I mean, to be honest with you, I look back at that book and I kind of cringe when I see some of the things. I must confess, like, oh my God, I did that. I look back and I cringe. But I am proud of the fact nonetheless. And I think too, what prevents a lot of people from writing a book, maybe I'm even preempting some of your questions, is the fact that they don't think that they're going to be putting out your best work. And the truth is, you're not going to be putting out your best work, but is the best you can do at the time. And so it is better to start than to stay stall and not do anything. Done is better than great. Moving forward is always better than staying in a stationary position, because movement creates momentum. So when you're moving, however tiny the steps are, then momentum begins to develop.
That is so key, because nobody is like a child learning to walk. you wobble before you walk. Every master was once a disaster. So your first book very often is not your best book, but as you keep practicing, you get better. Your first year in business can't be your best year, maybe best year to date, but as you get better, then with the years and the time invested and what you've learned, like wine, you get better with time, and done is better than great. Take action word. I love that. So I really want to get to the podcast, because that's the thing you're most known for now. I call you the podcast queen, and to even make that an official title, your authority, you wrote a book called Podcast Power. So how did you get into podcasting? I don't want to touch up on the book yet, what the book has done for that. Talk to us about podcasting. How did you get into that and why?
All right, so answer that question. So you talked about your comedy podcast queen, and I literally from day one started branding myself as that. But the interesting thing is, I remember going to a huge podcast conference in the US when going out was keeping, and I was talking to a marketing expert. Well, somebody introduced us, and he began to share with the expert what I did and what I'm doing in Jamaica for podcasting and stuff. And before he even heard that I'm being called a Jamaican podcast queen, he said, "What, you're the Jamaican podcast queen?" I'm like, okay, there goes alignment. So how did I get into podcasting? Good question. So having a conversation with somebody here in Jamaica, who a lot of us in lot of maybe those are listening, watching in the Caribbean know of her, Ingrid Riley. And I had a radio show in 2014 to 16 on Pro 106. So it was 3 seasons, and each season was 13 weeks. And the final season in 2016, I decided to do a Caribbean edition. And I interviewed people from all, entrepreneurs from all over the Caribbean and stuff, including, again, Nerissa Golden. We're coming from way back, right? And so in doing that, I said to myself, I really wanted to reach a bigger audience. And it was that conversation I was having with Ingrid. And I remember Ingrid at the time shared 3 top podcasters with me in terms of, what they're doing, what their podcast is about, and so on. Because somebody at that same conference that she was speaking at suggested that I look at podcasting if I want to go really big and stuff. So that's what I did. And when she shared those 3 with me, I remember Lee Dumas was one of them and 2 others. But I remember John Lee Dumas, and I fell in love with his podcast, like totally in love, like love at first sight. And in falling in love with him, I built a relationship, engaged with him, because I was really seriously considering going that option. So I really learned from the best, and he's pretty much the creme de la creme. So I decided that, you know what, I'm going to learn from the best. And so in engaging with him, he began to even did my audio. Well, he was the one who did my audio bumper. If you listen, when you listen to the Entrepreneurial You podcast, you will hear he's the one, his voice. He was my first guest. He has spoken at my virtual summit. And so we built a relationship. I've actually met him in person, brought him a personalized gift and stuff. So over time, I recognize, well, not even over time, I recognized from then that I'm going to do this thing. And I saw the potential that it had, because John Lee Dumas is podcast is Entrepreneurs on Fire. And he literally states on his website in plain sight how much he earns from podcasting each month, etc., etc. So it's very visible. And I'm like, wow, there is so much potential here. I am going to do this thing, because when you come to Jamaica and in the Caribbean, I mean, thankfully, I am a big part of the change that is happening, so it's not that anymore. But people used to ask, when you say that you have a podcast or you listen to podcasts, and like, what? What's that? Right? We don't really get that question anymore. The question, get is, what's your podcast? Right? So I deliberately decide that I am going to be a part of the change, the landscape in this arena in the Caribbean, in Jamaica in particular. And so I was clear that I am going to, one, because we also have a culture in Jamaica that if you don't have a number of followers, then people perhaps think you're not important. Or if you're not considered a local celebrity, then you don't get the attention. So I decided that history would have to be very kind to me, and I'm going to allow history to be kind to me. And here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to use the media. I'm going to use the traditional media, which, the print, the TV, the radio. And I decided that I'm going to be an evangelist for podcasting. I began coaching one-on-one, as well as I used to do workshops, live workshops. And then all of that, I eventually decided I'm also producing podcasts for other companies. So stay tuned for the most recent one I've done. You're all gonna love it. And that's pretty much how I started, and why, pretty much.
What I'm hearing is that you were intentional, because there are many roadmaps, as Seth said, to get to a particular destination. There are several routes. But once you decide on where you're going, then you can work out the rest. And so when it was suggested to you about the podcasting, you took that up, but you had some goals and you were intentional about it. But one of the things is that now that people are hearing about podcasts, because I heard about podcasts and I did almost 100 episodes of YouTube videos, Facebook videos, and I was calling it my podcast, my Design to Win podcast, and putting it up on YouTube, interviewing people, doing my own solo stuff. And then I learned that that's not a podcast. So what makes a podcast different from another YouTube show and that kind of thing? Because the material seemed to be the same for me. What is a podcast and how is it different from just interviewing people and going on YouTube? Talk to us.
Ruth, I take that very personally. And I'm really deeply offended, like seriously offended when I hear people talking about their live streams and calling it podcasts. I am so hurt. So a podcast is an audio or video file that's available for download on the internet, or, whether it's available by subscription or live stream. So for example, when you go to my website, henekawatkisporter.com, you will see a tab that says podcast, right? And so that is, you can view it online, or you can go to any other podcast directory, such as Apple, Google, Stitcher, however many. There are so many of them. And you search for the Entrepreneurial You Podcast, and then you can hit subscribe. And you subscribe. So once an episode launches, it comes to your phone or whatever device you've subscribed on. Now, what makes a podcast different from a regular MP3 file is those elements. But in addition to that, you must also have an RSS feed. Don't get all bent out of shape with the RSS and stuff. It's just rich site summary. That's what it means. But technically what it does. So let me give you an example to explain it. If you go on somebody's website and you're able to see their Twitter feed coming up on their website, I know you perhaps see that, or their Instagram feed, or their LinkedIn feed, whichever feed they choose to put there, your website is able to get that feed from Instagram, from you, from wherever, as a result of an RSS, right? So just don't worry, think about the technicality of it, just think about what it does. And so it allows it to pick it up so that you now are able to access it. Similar, because you would have submitted your RSS feed to the various directories, podcast directories, then they're able to pick it up. And so persons, wherever they are, can actually listen. They can download it for when they want to listen. So it's downloadable and it's available via RSS feed. So those are the things that make it a podcast. I mean, you do have video podcasts, and you do have, which these are to a lesser extent, however. And the fact is, people have their podcasts, and they have the YouTube show or the Facebook show, which is the same content. And they can get away, because they already have a podcast. They can get away and say, oh, my podcast is on YouTube. Or it's, because it's the same content, but the actual, in technicality, the actual file, the actual thing is available via the platform and via which you need a host. So even if you don't have, or even if you have a website, you also need a podcast host, which is because when your podcast grows, you don't want to have all these downloads and stuff eating up your bandwidth, right? So it's important that you will have a host, HOST. Just as you have somewhere to live, your podcast has somewhere to live as well. right? By not being on your domicile on your website, but your feed. So you have a host, whether in my case, Blueberry or Podbean or whatever they are, you have the host, and the host will give you a feed, and that RSS feed is what you put into your website so that the Apple Podcast and the Google and all these other platforms can pick it up and have access to it. In a nutshell.
Wow. So I'm here. I hope I am able to translate what you said. So even though the content may look the same, like when you see Lewis Howes, School of Greatness, and all the other podcasts, and even now Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income, he has a YouTube version of it. But the difference is where it is hosted and that feed through some podcast system.
Clarify. So the feed, you're on the right track. So the feed is what the host will give you.
Okay.
Whether once you sign up to a host and you pay a fee, they give you that. And so you can now put that in the back end of your website if you have one. If you don't have one, you still have the feed that the other platforms will pick up, as well as your host.
Okay. All right. So you get that feed from the host, and then the video becomes not video, the audio primarily becomes downloadable in many different places. And when you talk about host, you're talking about like Anchor, Podbean, some
Blueberry,
of those places,
Blueberry.
right? Blueberry.
Yeah.
All right. So we're not going to take all of the time to talk about podcasting and how to set it up. Mm-hmm. But if you want coaching on podcasting and the book that will distill the information on podcasting, I have my copy. And so, Heneka, for those who are interested, they still don't have a clue. What you just said was German and French. What can you do for us to get into this podcasting thing? And then tell us what a podcast will do for you. So how can you help us to start this thing, and what will it do for us? Talk to us.
All right. Thank you for that. So for sure, Ruth, I'm here. And that's why I'm here too, to help you to launch your podcast. All you have to do, one-on-one coaching. I'm your girl. And in just 1 hour, I can teach you to become a podcaster. So you can contact me after that. I'm sure Ruth is going to provide all that details. But what has podcasting done for me? What have you done for me lately? Ooh, lots. Can I tell you? So podcasting for me was a means to an end. Although it's an end in itself, it's also a means to several other ends. And I was very, very clear when I was pivoting business, because one of the things I did, I had my store, Patois Apparel in Devon House. I mean, in retrospect, I keep telling persons that perhaps I wanted an ego boost to say, hey, I have a store. But, I shouldn't have had a physical space. I should have leveraged online and just work with it. But you live and you learn. And so when I wanted to switch from just having that business, I recognized I still have a passion or an intention to continue that business, but I saw where I was going, how I wanted to speak to people and help people and all of that. I decided that I'm going to focus on podcasting. Let that be the central theme and everything else revolve around it. So it's like, everything is satellite going around what this one central theme of podcasting. And so I started the coaching, as I mentioned, started producing for persons, workshops, doing the book. I had to do the book because, again, a book makes you an authority in the subject or perceived authority on the subject, and perception is reality. So I decided that I'm going to do that. But it has done so many things for me. So in terms of branding, and this was no mistake that the book is called Podcast Power, the quick start guide to launching and leveling up your brand. Your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room, according to Jeff Bezos, right? And I really wanted to make sure that when I'm in that room, that everybody is saying something good about me when it comes on to my work. And whether or not, whatever you think of me, you're going to think also of podcasting, and that's great. Mission accomplished. So let's start with something very simple. A podcast for me, that podcast has allowed me to, through the books and the actual podcast, given me press passes to major events. So when I want to go to a major event, all I simply say, reach out and say, hey, guess what? I would love to come and cover your event, perhaps do a blog post or something in exchange for me getting to go to the event free. And I only select high profile event that I want to be a part of to do that kind of a thing. And so I've gotten to several events just by, being a media rep with a media pass, right? I'm a journalist from that standpoint. So I have done that. And the interesting thing about, I remember one of the events I went to where I got a press pass, and I met someone who the intention was to invite this gentleman to an event that I was hosting a couple months down the road. But I hosted that event and the gentleman didn't come. That's fine. I remember having a debriefing for the meeting for that event, and leaving that meeting, I'm sitting in my car in traffic. My phone was stolen. I remember that, hey, I met this gentleman who is with cybercrime, because by the time I went through the ordinary channel of, reporting it to the police and they were telling me what I need to do, is that they were traumatizing me again. And I'm like, heck no, I am not doing that. I'm not going through that again. And so I actually contacted this gentleman who is, I mentioned, this cybercrime. Suffice it to say, this phone that was stolen, 4 months after that, I was able to get back my phone. So the point is, a podcast and a book can get you back your phone. Just saying. So that's so in addition to the press pass and getting back my phone, just so the things in terms of branding and hosting events. When I did LeaderCast events, my first LeaderCast events, podcasting opened the door for me, because LeaderCast is the largest one-day leadership event globally. It's one of the biggest leadership brands. Actually, it was started by John Maxwell, and when John Maxwell thought that he was retiring, he sold it, and then he came back in. But so it's one of those leadership events that it's important. So I was able to now host LeaderCast events in Jamaica, because I was able to present to them and say, hey, I have this podcast. These are the people that I'm speaking with. This is what I'm about. And so easily that door opened. I hosted the event. So events, press pass, expertise, right? Writing the book came as a result of the podcast, writing podcast power. I coach people on it. I show my expertise. I coach people. I have workshops. I do masterminds. I produce podcasts. So earning potential increased significantly, because though I'm not always, my monetization is not always direct, although it is direct as well, because I do have sponsors that are on board for the podcast, just like you would have a radio show and you have sponsors on board, or a TV show and you have sponsors on board. I do have sponsors on board, but most of my income will come indirectly by associating what I do with the podcast, and as a result of that, I get coaching clients, coach people to podcast. I produce, I mentioned my latest project now is with the Jamaica Stock Exchange, which is going to be launched this coming Monday as well. So that's a huge project. So those are just some of the ways that the podcast has helped me.
Good. And for some of the top podcast platforms, you do have to pay a fee. They have a monthly hosting fee, just like a website, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Sure.
So
yes, you do. So, and some of them you have free ones, and you have some that you have to pay for. Like, it ranges depending on the package that you want. On average, though, it's going to cost you like $12 per month. US.
All right, thank you. So this is really new ground for many of us. A podcast is doing for you what a book does. But guess what she did? The book gave her the authority so that she could level up what she's doing and create more products and services and income. Am I right, Heneka?
Yes, ma'am.
Whatever you need in terms of information on podcasting, she even has her WhatsApp number on her website. If you want to purchase the book, go to her website. So that's HenekaWatkis-Porter.com. For those, type in her name, HenekaWatkis-Porter.com, and you will go there. There have been some gems that have been dropping in the comment section. Heneka, I want to thank you for sharing. So Heneka, thank you for dropping all of those gems on us and for showing us the relationship between a book and a brand and a business. And there's an author who is my model that I follow. I met her primarily through her podcast, the Creative Pen podcast, Joanna Penn. And when I met Joanna Penn on the podcast and started hearing her talk about her books, I became a fan, and almost every nonfiction book that this lady has, I have bought them. And then my schedule every Monday, my day is not done without listening to Joanna Penn. So there are a couple podcasts that are staple in my schedule. I can put my pot on fire knowing that they're going to come out, and I don't miss it. If it's like reading my Bible almost now, if you don't listen to this podcast, it's something missing. What go on? So I want to say, authors, if you are able to, and you can sustain it, start a podcast. A podcast can help you sell books. I've bought about 8 books from Joanna Penn and books from other authors whom she's brought on the show. So this is the way to go. All right. So thank you so much, Heneka. Is there a final word you have for us before I go to the notices and say who the next speaker is? I'll give you.
Yes, I do have a final word. And it's something I didn't mention in the presentation earlier, that sometimes I can't tell you how many books I have sold. I'm not counting, because for me, when I recognized by the first book that this is not going to make me into a billionaire, I decided I wasn't going to let that be the objective, to make money from the actual book sales. It is what I use the books to do, and how the books help me to position myself in a certain light. And that is where the value is, not necessarily because unless, you have sometimes you're picked up by these traditional publishers and you get your work out there, you're not going to become wealthy from just the sale of books. So do not let that dissuade you, and do not go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to make billions. It's not going to happen. Let me just burst your bubble. It's not going to happen. Yes, you will sell a few books, but the important thing is, how do you leverage the books for other things to elevate your profile, seen as an expert, do workshops, do speaking events, etc., etc.
Thank you so much, Heneka. You've said it all.
Well, I trust that you enjoyed that interview with Heneka Watkis-Porter, first aired live on our Caribbean Entrepreneur Summit, the first summit, which was held in January 2021, where it's about encouraging more Caribbean authors to level up and to leverage your book to advance whatever mission or cause you have, and to create financial freedom and go beyond book sales. Now let's talk about my entrepreneurship ventures for this week. I want to mention 2 things. We've used the book Entrepreneur Secrets to create the Entrepreneur Secrets Academy, where we teach you to write nonfiction books fast, publish without breaking the bank, and generate lasting impact and income. There is a membership group which opens twice per year in January and June. And so the registration or the enrollment period for June is about to be closed. So when this podcast comes out, it will be closed in two days, on the 16th of June. And you can go to our website, entrepreneursecrets.com, and sign up. It's just $47 per month. And we teach you how to publish a small nonfiction book for, yes, an unbelievable price, less than $1,000 and how to leverage that for maximum impact and income. And also, if you want to learn to become a book coach or a book publisher or for publishing services, this is the group for you. Quite a number of our newbies in the last 4 to 5 months have been doing well. Their books have become #1 bestsellers on Amazon. Some of them have gotten on the Amazon bestselling list for several categories and #1 in new releases. And I want to shout out a couple of those members today. Joanne Richards Goff. Her book, Auntie Jojo Goes Vegan, I think is still, at the time when this comes out, #1 in new releases for the category that has to do with Caribbean food and wine. So this book talks about her journey to becoming vegan, and it has 38 recipes which are tailored for persons in the Caribbean and especially Jamaicans. The other book that came out from another of our member is Dare to Ask by Garfield Robinson. His book launch was Sunday, 13th June, and he was able to make it to the Amazon bestselling list for one of his categories. And both of these members of the group, they launched their ebooks and are currently working on the print edition. And Joanne did it for her birthday, and it was just a wonderful celebration. And so we rejoice with these members. We cannot guarantee that anybody will become an Amazon bestseller, whether it's #1 bestseller in all of the store or at the lesser level in the categories that are posted hourly. But these folks did the work, and we're so proud of them because they did it within 4 months. And so we are happy for them. The next entrepreneurship venture is based on the book Penny to Win. And that is the book monetization and marketing made easy bootcamp and course. Now the course is self-paced and it's really preparation for the 2-hour bootcamp, and it's $99. So you can go to bit.ly or bit.ly/BMME course, or just go to entrepreneursecretsacademy.com and look for it on the page. Now that bootcamp takes place on the 24th of June. That's Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. And members of our Entrepreneur Secrets membership group, you have access to that for free. It is part of the offering that you get for being a member of the group. So that's it in terms of entrepreneurship ventures and shout outs. And this week I'm going to be doing a short reads, and it comes from Heneka's book. I'm going to read a chapter on podcasting, and so stay tuned. This reading is from chapter 9.1, Your Launch Strategy. And she quotes from Seth Godin, who has appeared on our podcast twice. Heneka's podcast is the Entrepreneurial You. There's no shortage of remarkable ideas. What's missing is the will to execute them. Seth Godin. You have probably heard this said over 1,000 times. If you fail to plan, then you should plan to fail. Having a podcast, like everything else that you do, requires careful planning with a solid strategy in order to be successful. The first part of your strategy should include a vision and mission for your podcast. This will help to further cement your why. And then she says, refer to chapter 3 for a reminder of what was discussed. It is recommended that you launch your podcast with 3 episodes, including your About Me episode. In this episode, you will start out with sharing about yourself, why you're creating your podcast, and what your journey has been like. It gives listeners a chance to know, like, and trust you. 3 episodes will provide enough shows to listen to without overwhelming listeners when they first discover you, and just as much to not disappoint them. By now, you know I'm big on momentum. This will create the impetus necessary to give you as many downloads within the first 24 hours of launch. The main goal of many newbie podcasters is to get listed on what Apple Podcasts call new and noteworthy. This is a period of 8 weeks that your podcast can be featured in the top section to help get noticed and gain traction. It is believed the ranking for Apple Podcasts is partially based on downloads and reviews within the last 24 hours. With 3 episodes, you will have 3 times the download. Part of your strategy should be to ask your listeners at the end of the show to subscribe, rate, and review in Apple Podcasts. You may also ask them to leave a comment in the show notes page of your episodes if you have a website. The more engagement you have, the more you will get noticed. Finally, consider creating a teaser video to promote ahead of time. This video could have the same information that is in the About Me episode, but shorter. So that's our short reads for today, dear listeners. If you're thinking of launching a podcast, I encourage you to get the book Podcast Power. It's on Amazon, or just go to HenekaWatkis-Porter.com and get the book. So that's it for today's show. Remember to send us your short reads, and we invite you to share this podcast. It is new. This is our 7th episode with your friends, and we want to make this the number one place for authors in the Caribbean or entrepreneurs to learn how to market and monetize their books and to build their brands and businesses and organizations with books and go beyond book sales. This is Ruth Taylor saying thank you for listening. Ta for now. Until next time.
I'm Tamara Francis, educator and editor. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, and share the podcast with your network. If you'd like to increase your impact and income with books, visit authorpreneursecrets.com for more resources, including the books Pen It to Win It and Authorpreneur Secrets. Join the Authorpreneur Secrets Academy membership group for courses, coaching, and community support to write, publish, and win with books. Enrollment is in January and June each year. You may also sign up for one of Ruth's Publishing Made Easy courses or private coaching to write and publish your next book. Until next time, go pen it to win it.